CF is ranked number 13 in the U.S. for affordability, is military-friendly, and offers a full student life experience. Make CF your first choice. Call 352-873-5800.
Broadcasting from the Paddock Mall Studios, this is WOCA, Ocala, Gainesville, The Villages, 1370 AM, 96.3 FM, The Source.
All right, 25 minutes before 10 o'clock. Thank you for tuning in. We've heard America described as a melting pot. We've heard it described as a salad bowl, right?
Yes.
And take your pick, which metaphor you like the best. I like to think of it as just simply a neighborhood. Mm-hmm. We are a neighborhood, and if you go to my old neighborhood, you will see it's pretty diverse. But I am 64 years old, and when I grew up there, it really wasn't that diverse. My neighborhood has changed for the better. You go there now, and you will see probably every shade of skin color there is. We had a wonderful, oh my gosh, there was a display, an exhibition over at the Appleton Museum of Art that had these little circles on the wall that you could put your arm up and see which color you are.
Yeah. There was a lot of them too on the wall.
And it's not just colors; it's also faiths, and it's also languages, and it's foods and musics. And I think the music and the food bring me together with everybody. It's like, you got some good food here. The number one restaurant in this town is always the Indian restaurant.
Yes.
So always comes up number one.
I know.
All right, Tirrell D. Whitley is on the phone. He's the CEO of Liquid Soul. He's a member of the Academy of Arts and Sciences, the moderator of the Multicultural Media Correspondent Association Summit, and the executive producer of Brian Banks, a biopic of the wrongfully imprisoned high school football star. With the help of the California Innocence Project, Banks' conviction was overturned in 2012, and in 2013 he played in the NFL preseason with the Atlanta Falcons. Oh my gosh, how long was he in prison? We don't. I'll ask. Yes. Tirrell Whitley. Good morning, Tirrell. How are you? Good to hear from you.
Good morning, Larry. I'm so glad to be on the air with you and Robin this morning. It's a pleasure.
Are you in Washington, D.C.?
No, I'm actually in Atlanta, Georgia. I was just sharing with Robin. I'm also a graduate of Florida A&M University down there in Tallahassee, Florida, and so I know a little something about the Southern ways. And but I go to D.C. quite often.
Oh, neat. And do you know David Morgan?
I do. I know David very, very well. So we've been connected with the MMCA, where he, of course, is our president. He started it. He founded the MMCA. So we've been connected for quite a while.
Oh, nice. Well, nice to meet you too, as well. So tell me about the summit that's happening. Let's see, on the 13th, right? Next week.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yep. So this is next Friday, September 13th, in Washington Convention Center, room 207B, and this is open to the public. And this is part of the Congressional Black Caucus, their annual legislative conference, where we're going to be talking about media diversity and really covering some of the obstacles and opportunities. It really is a deep dive into the conversation of diversity as we look at some of these major media consolidations like the iHearts, or even what takes place here in film and television, let's say Viacom and CBS, or AT&T and Time Warner. Even Disney and Fox, and what those landscapes ultimately shape up to look like for cultural audiences and diversity across the board. So we have some really great executives, some talent behind and in front of the screen. I feel blessed as a moderator as well as the board chair for the MMCA that I kind of operate in multiple spheres as a media executive in the marketing sphere, but I'm also a producer, an executive producer of content. I've also executive produced a music album, so I've done a lot in media that I think gives me an opportunity to have a very diverse and wide conversation.
Oh, I love that. And you mentioned music, and obviously in the Innocence Project, there's an NFL mention. I think sports and music and food, I think maybe those are the three things that have really helped diversify us as a nation.
Absolutely. Those are passion points. I think sports is a great landing spot there, like you mentioned. Music does it. It allows audiences to come together under common interest, and our media is a key factor in those spaces. And so I think, encouraging and working with our legislative, which, of course, our summit is hosted by Representative Val Demings out of Florida, right there close to Orlando, of course, and she's the chair of the Media Diversity Congressional Brain Trust. And even Representative G.K. Butterfield out of North Carolina, who's, of course, the former chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, they have hosted us and graciously hosted us, and we've been working diligently with their offices to really move this agenda forward. And again, this isn't our first year. We've done this over several years and highlighted several individuals as well as several different topics. So I'm really excited about what we're going to do this year.
And when you talk about the lack of diversity in media, is it just about the story coverage? Is it about the talent on the screen? Is it about the researchers behind the screens?
It's really all of that. Here's a great thing, that there are so many topics and areas of concern that sometimes, many times we don't peel back the layers to really see them or understand them. So, for example, folks will see the success of a Black Panther film by Disney, or even Crazy Rich Asians, and they'll say, "Oh wow, yeah, there's great diversity on screen, and these movies have made lots of money." But just yesterday, for example, the co-writer from Crazy Rich Asians, who was working on the sequel, she discovered, and it had been going on for a few months, that her pay was 8 to 10 times lower than her other counterparts. And these were her Caucasian counterparts on the film, from a writer's perspective. And, Warner Brothers went in and tried to resolve this, but effectively said, hey, it is what it is, and we're going to try to make some adjustments. And they based it on the experience, but she realized that she was the one delivering kind of the cultural level and cultural nuances that made Crazy Rich Asians such a wild success at #1 and over $238 million grossed internationally and worldwide. Well, she ultimately left the project, and they've attempted to bring her back. She said no. And I think it shows that the media company just really didn't see her value. And that's important when we talk about diversity and inclusion, that it's not just what happens on screen, but there's a value chain of spend and money and resources that have to be addressed as well. The way she put it, which I thought was great, is that she felt that the women and people of color were treated as soy sauce. They were hired to sprinkle cultural significant details on the screenplay rather than crediting them with the substantive work of crafting the story. So, when you have topics and issues like that, we have to really unpack them, peel back. We also look at media spend and advertisers. Like I said, those are the resources that allow women and men, people of color, to maintain these media channels. And as these consolidations happen, it becomes tougher and tougher. So bringing those decision makers to the table to talk to our legislative, to educate our audiences and educate the constituencies, but also our legislators about these topics is what the MMCA is all about. And I'm glad that we've been able to be on the forefront of unpacking these conversations and delivering qualified solutions.
I like that metaphor, by the way, and it's probably accurate. I'm guessing the soy sauce metaphor is what I'm referring to. It's probably not so far from being dead on. I wonder, one of the things that I think is that whenever we make sure that there's diversity, at least even if it's only on the surface, if the children who are watching a show, for example, see it, I think they will be the ones who grow up to become unconcerned about somebody else's differences. It's what I think. I really think, and we've been saying this as people for generations, and so far it hasn't really happened completely, but I think it starts there anyway.
It does. I agree with you. I think, in addition to that, I think we also have to put in constructs to help, kind of institutionalize these areas and make sure that they don't get overlooked. And what I mean by that is, again, I was part of the Comcast. My agency was part of the Comcast NBC deal, and there was some discussions, and there was actually a MOU to say, hey, let's make sure that we ensure that there is a certain level of cultural diversity on the channels and the lineups with our cable networks for African Americans, Hispanics, and others, and Asians, and it was really tough. I'm going to tell you. I mean, it was really tough to manage just the spend. I saw the spend. I was behind the scenes. I was working with many of the executives on the advertising spend, looking at the representation spend. But the key here is that when representation is in place, not just in front of the screen, but when representation is also in place behind the screen, that's in the green lighting and the decision making in the conference rooms where budgets are decided, where resources are moved around. That becomes very key and important to how these things can move forward, and how generations behind us, how they will respond and react to it, because they understand that's the norm, not the exception. To date, it's been more the exception. We've been pushing and really looking at how we include women into these conversations. How do we include cultural audiences? Right. And that's, that's a continuum, and we're trying to shift that narrative to more the norm. And working with our legislators, I think there's just assistance that they can provide to ensure that the construct is there, and that people recognize it as such.
I worked in a factory in a manufacturing plant that worked with places like Lockheed Martin and things about 30 years ago, and there was a government mandate for equal opportunity to employ X number of veterans, X number of females, males, X number of people of color, that type of thing, X number of whatever age you are. I mean, that company had to adhere to that. And do you think that's going to come into effect again?
Well, I think that some of those things may still be there, and I think some of those initiatives are important. I think they do help, add to just the overall mix of diversity, and I think it's helpful when you begin reporting it and looking at it. I think it becomes dangerous when no one knows. Or there's no knowledge of, okay, how are things and decisions being made, and where are some of these resources being shifted. And I'll tell you what's interesting, because the media landscape, even you guys know it from a radio and from a broadcast perspective, it is changing quickly. I mean, as podcasts come in play, or as you look at social media or digital platforms, you begin to see that if we don't stay on the forefront of, okay, inclusion, voices will get lost, and or people will become overlooked.
Right.
So it's not always that, and again, I think the mandates are helpful. Our thought is, how do we move that closer to the norm? And so our job in the MMCA is to really, from a nonpartisan perspective, as a nonprofit, to really marshal a tribe of media and social influencers to resolve and break down barriers and significantly move the needle forward in media diversity. That's important to us, finding common ground, and where we can find, and serving as a trusted advisor for media companies and policymakers, as well as media diversity stakeholders and advocates, to say, okay, how do we resolve these issues moving forward, where it doesn't become a spin cycle of something that we've seen, years and years before. So I think that's really where we are now. How do we get to more of a norm versus the exception?
It is nice to be agreeing with one of our guests. It's kind of fun when you disagree with a guest, but I'm just agreeing with everything. You maybe don't even realize how much Robin and I are in agreement with you. We also do children's books when we don't do this, and one of the things we have tried to do is to make sure that the characters in those books are everything you can think of, and without making it as part of the story. It's just that they are there. The one of the characters has she's got, what do you call that thing that the Muslim girls wear? The big overall clothing.
Oh, it's not a burqa. It's oh gosh, I can't remember.
But there's a character with the clothing on. It's a young boy with a yarmulke on, indicating he's Jewish, and it's just it's just something we've done. So we absolutely agree with what you're saying. Can I ask you, is there a way, or am I putting you on the spot? Like if you were to give a report card to the Disney Corporation or to the Kellogg's company or to any well-known organization, are some doing better than others?
Well, there are. I will say there are some that have been making consistent strides. But here's the thing. I think, Larry, even when an entity takes major steps forward, when we see these major conglomerate consolidations come together, then it's almost like a reboot, because now you're bringing two different corporate cultures and executive structures together, and they're all trying to find their way. So when you take a CBS and a Viacom and you say, okay, now guys, let's mesh our efforts, or Disney and Fox, and now let's bring these things together, sometimes certain things get pushed to the background. Everyone's concerned about, okay, our market share, our revenues. They're concerned about, okay, what is the forecast looks like. But then if you begin to pull back or leave out, hey, what are we doing as it relates to diversity? And do we have veterans included? What about characters with disabilities? Are we looking at LGBT? Are we being inclusive? And like you mentioned, is it naturally just what we do to represent our neighborhoods and the people that we serve? When you know that 40% of the U.S. population of multicultural consumers make up your media space, but only 5.2% is in your total advertising and media spend, there's a huge disparity there. So I think some companies have figured it out. Some others are really lagging behind. But again, when these, iHearts of the world, when these larger and larger conglomerates come together, it now creates a new dynamic where we have to, come back in and just ensure that some of those diversity and some of those inclusive activities are still intact. And that's where the assistance of representatives like Val Demings or Butterfield, they can help us in making sure we're being forward-facing, forward-thinking, and we're putting these topics on the table sooner than later. And that's the help that we try to, from an MMCA perspective, that's the type of help that we try to ensure and create.
But sometimes the expertise isn't there. There can be job openings, and then a variety of people will apply. And to me, it's really good to know that the person who is most qualified is going to be selected for the job and not passed over because they need X number of older women in their job, for example, or X number of veterans.
I agree. I think, but and here's also a flip on that conversation, and this is something that I do personally, and I've been very active in this space. It's amazing to me, Robert, when I find out how job openings come up and they never really get known that there's an opportunity here, or it's not widespread, meaning the search is not available or made available in a wide enough sphere to reach some of those qualified candidates. So, for example, I had an executive that was, even now I'm working with an executive that's leaving from one conglomerate, and she's trying to move someplace else. But, finding those opportunities at that level, especially at the C level, the executive level, are sometimes a much tighter conversation. And even within the search firms, luckily, because I've worked across the studio system and the network system for a while, I know enough people know me to say, hey, Tirrell, who do you know? Can you toss a few names, a few people on the table for us to consider? And I think that that's important, so that you look at the full landscape to find the best person, because sometimes the best person may just not be in the sphere of outreach that you're engaging with.
That's absolutely right.
So I've seen that happen time and time again. I've been lucky enough to move folks around. A perfect example, and I'll be quick with this, but we have on one of our panels, we have Vanessa Morrison. Vanessa Morrison, African-American female. She is the president of Fox Family. Before that, she was the president of Fox Animation that put out hits like Rio, for Fox. or even I forget the dinosaurs right now, but she's done several of these. Ice Age. I'm sorry, she's put out Ice Age. So she's put out several major level content films. Well, I know Vanessa Morrison intently. She is, she's one of really. There've only been two presidents of networks of studios like this. And Vanessa has that opportunity to really, to move the needle. So her ability to speak to this conversation and how to elevate and present executives at that level, I think that's important. And then I think she has more insight on what those tables and dialogues and even those type of opportunities look like.
Tirrell Whitley is our guest, and I wanted to ask you, Tirrell, for the listeners, let me just tell you, Tirrell is with the Multicultural Media Correspondent Association. There is an event, Diversity in Media Industry, Obstacles and Opportunities, happening 1 week from today in the Washington Convention Center in Washington, D.C. What I wanted you to address, if you could, the local community leaders. We have community leaders. Robert and I know them because they come into the show all the time, and they're probably as diverse as a community can get, representing their own segment of that diversity, if that makes sense. And some of them are very, very powerful speakers right in this little town. So let's say they're listening right now. How do they become part of this, and is it possible to even attend the one next week, or is it too late for that one for them, but maybe they could join up and be part of it in the future?
Absolutely, they can engage. I mean, if they're able to be in Washington, D.C. on Friday, September 13th, we're going to be at the Washington Convention Center, room 207B. They can absolutely engage with us directly there. If not, they can, of course, connect with us online on our website, which is mmcadc.org. Let me repeat that, mmcadc.org. And then over social platforms, that's Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, we're going to be live streaming and providing updates. Our handle is at MMCADC. I would also say this, and this is part of the reason why we're at the Congressional Black Caucus and why we're at D.C., is that I would advise and recommend for local representatives or local constituents or people that want to engage, talk to your local representative like Val Demings. The reason why we're engaging with Val Demings in Florida or G.K. Butterfield in North Carolina is we want them to be aware. We have many other members, John Lewis, Sheila Jackson Lee, many members from the CDC that engage with us because they want to understand what this platform and what the media industry looks like. They recognize there's a lot of dollars, there's a lot of power in images and voice. They know that to be instinct. The key sometimes is them having, and we try to equip them with the information around, okay, what's happening in the industry, what things they should be aware of, and then how and where can we make effective change. And I think from a local perspective up to the national perspective, the MMCA is really working instinctly to bring these conversations to the forefront. Talk about solutions. It's not just about, hey, what are the obstacles? We also want to talk about the opportunities, how legislators can help, and or just connect the dots to make sure that that inclusion and diversity stays part of an active conversation.
I love what you're doing. Again, it might be more fun if we disagreed, because then we could argue a little bit. But
this is more productive.
I feel like it's the easiest interview ever when you agree with somebody, right? Tirrell, thank you so much for what you're doing. First of all, you're making the world a better place. Thank you for sharing it with our listening audience. If we have any local leaders who want to be part of this, I would love it if you A, contacted Tirrell, and B, contacted us so you can come into the studio and be like a local kind of a person representing this whole movement.
Sure, exactly.
And Tirrell, I have a question to ask you real quickly. Can I ask you to hang on after we go off the air and talk to Robin, because we'd like to send you one of our children's books?
Absolutely, I would love that. And again, thank you so much for having me. I run marketing with Liquid Soul for 19 years in the entertainment industry. I'm now also a producer, executive produced Brian Banks as well as Aretha Franklin's Amazing Grace documentary. Next up, I'm working on Respect, which is the Aretha Franklin biopic starring Jennifer Hudson. I am in front and behind the screen from an executive perspective all the way through the content.
Wow.
I've also worked in music, and so I'm looking at this from multiple perspectives of how we can change and modify this conversation and dialogue so that we all can be seen and represented on the forefront of our media. Our voices and our vision and our presentation is important.
Nice. You're put on earth to do exactly what you're doing. Tirrell, thank you for sharing that with us. Let me take a little break, and please speak to Robin in just a minute. We'll be right back. This is The Source, WOCA Ocala.
Broadcasting from the Paddock Mall Studios, this is WOCA, Ocala, Gainesville, The Villages, 1370 AM, 96.3 FM, The Source.
Fox News, I'm Chris Foster. Hurricane Dorian's made its first landfall in the United States, hitting Cape Hatteras, North Carolina.
Dorian continues to move northeastward up the southeastern coastline, still bringing the risk for hurricane-force winds, life-threatening storm surge, flooding, and isolated tornadoes.
That's Fox meteorologist Janet Steen. She says the storm will move offshore today with parts of the mid-Atlantic and southern New England, maybe giving gusty wind, some rain, and rough seas. The monthly jobs report's out, 130,000 jobs created, the unemployment rate steady at 3.7%. Former Starbucks CEO Howard Schultz now says he will not run for president. He'd been considering it.
Schultz, who told the Fox News Rundown podcast back in April.
The country and the American people deserve so much better.
Writing on his website, he's concluded that an independent campaign for the White House is not how I can best serve our country.
Fox's Lillian Wu in New York. America is listening to Fox News.
Finding great candidates to hire can be like, well, trying to find a needle in a